Any other procedural issues before we start with comment? Okay, our first commenter, and I will also apologize if I misstate anyone's name when I introduce you. You can, of course, introduce yourself and correct me when you join. So our first commenter is Paul Connett. That's different than what's up here. Yeah, Paul Connett. That's different than what's. Sorry, I was looking at the written public commenter slide, but we're ready for Mr. Connett. Connett? Yep. Great. That's different than what's. Sorry, I was looking at the written public commenter slide, but we're ready for Mr. Connett. Connett? Yep. Great. That's different than what's. Sorry, I was looking at the written public commenter slide, but we're ready for Mr. We're having Connett. Some technical difficulty, yep. Mr. Connett. Don't worry, your time has not started. That's different than what's. Sorry, I was looking at the written public commenter slide, but we're ready for Mr. We're having Connett. Some technical difficulty, Mr. Connett. Don't worry, your time has not started. Zoom.
Oh, you know what? Sorry, I think it's because I had the YouTube video on.
Okay, now you're good. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Good afternoon, members of the BSC. I am an environmental health attorney who represents plaintiffs in a federal court case that is currently exploring whether fluoride added to drinking water poses a neurodevelopmental risk. A few years ago, in the summer of 2020, we had a trial, and the court heard compelling expert testimony from Dr. Bruce Lanphier, Dr. Howard Hu, Dr. Philippe Grandjean, and Dr. Kathleen M. At the end of our trial, the judge agreed that current science, especially the NIH-funded birth cohort studies from Canada and Mexico, raise, quote, serious questions, unquote, about the safety of fluoridation chemicals in water. But before rendering a final conclusion, the judge wanted to consider the findings of NTP's review. And so he placed the case on hold to await NTP's release of the monograph. And so we waited. And while we waited, we filed FOIA requests to understand why it was taking so long. And I'd like to share with you some of what we have learned. First, we have learned through the FOIA documents that NTP's staff scientists have done and are doing an admirable job standing up for scientific integrity in the face of intense and sustained political pressures. And I think we should all be grateful for that, because it has not been easy. The FOIA documents show that the pressure on NTP is coming from agencies with very strong partisan interests on fluoride, including the CDC's Division of Oral Health and NIDCR. These agencies have been working hand in glove with private lobbyists and PR professionals to smear and discredit the NTP's work at almost every turn. These pressures came to a head last May after NTP's monograph successfully cleared external peer review by 5 independent scientists. The FOIA documents show that NTP's scientists unequivocally considered the monograph to be complete and ready for publication in May of 2022. After 6 years of work, this should have been a moment to celebrate. But when NTP broke this news to CDC and NIDCR, it was like a code red emergency. The CDC and NIDCR immediately maneuvered to prevent the monograph from being released. And they succeeded in doing so by convincing political leadership at HHS to quash the report. The then scientific director at the NTP, Dr. Brian Berridge, made clear his misgivings about the political pressure. In an email obtained through FOIA, Dr. Berridge wrote, and I quote, "After 17 years in industry, I've seen efforts to modify messages to fit commercial interests. I wasn't party to that there, and I'm not game to do that here," unquote.
You have 1 minute.
And that is why we are here today, because agencies that aggressively promoted the addition of fluoridation chemicals to drinking water for over 50 years did not like NTP's science-based conclusions and had the political power to quash the report. I'd ask you to ask yourself this: is this how you think the NTP should be treated, where NTP monographs will only be released if the conclusions are compliant with the policy preferences of federal agencies? What kind of precedent does this establish for NTP's future reviews? In closing, I hope we would all agree that NTP should follow the science wherever it leads, even if it contradicts long-held policy preferences. This is what NTP staff scientists have endeavored to do over the
Time is up,
past
Mr. Connett.
years under very difficult circumstances, and I hope you will support NTP in this important public endeavor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. After each commenter, we will ask the Board of Scientific Counselors if you have any clarifying questions, and if not, we will move to the next commenter. Please use the raise hand function in Zoom if you have any questions for the commenter. Vina, go ahead. Dr. Singla, sorry. Wait, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Vina Singla with Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you for the comments. And my question is, will the documents that were obtained by your FOIA be made available?
Mr. Connett, are you still, is he still in the room? Oh, okay. Dr. Singla, he is not in the room, so the commenters are just in the room for their 5 minutes, and then really I think the opportunity is just for us to identify questions that we can come back to. So thank you. I will note that question. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no additional questions, I do have a process question. So should we have the commenters stay in the room for? Yep, so can we bring, oh, great, okay, super. So Mr. Connett, you're back. I don't know if you were streaming and you could see that there was a question posed to you.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm sorry, I got cut out there. Yes, we are happy to make all of the documents available that we have received through FOIA. And however, and I'm happy to, if anyone from the committee wants to contact us, I'm happy to provide that to the committee.
Thank you for that, and perhaps we could get instruction on how those would best be made available. We'll follow up. Someone from the staff will follow up with you, Mr. Connett, about how to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we appreciate that. And we're going to move to the next commenter in the interest of time. And I see on the list Chris Neurath. Is Chris in the Zoom? Okay, he's just been, they've just been admitted, so give a second. Okay, I see Chris. You have 5 minutes to share your oral comments with us, and we do have a timer running, and I'll alert you at 1 minute left. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Chris Neurath, and I'm representing the American Environmental Health Studies Project I want to thank the NTP for holding this public meeting. I'm going to talk about what the NTP systematic review has found and some of its implications. But first, I want to give my support to the BSc Workgroup's review. I concur with the majority of the workgroup's 466 comments. In the relatively small percentage where the workgroup offered suggestions, they were mostly for increasing the clarity of the reports. Having myself been accused of being a perfectionist, I can appreciate efforts to try to get the wording of the NTP's reports just right. But there are diminishing returns as well as competing interests at play. By summarizing what NTP systematic review has found, I believe that will help explain why there has been so much pushback and why this NTP report has been so long delayed. Next slide, please. What did the NTP find? Next slide. The NTP used its OHAT methodology and reached a moderate confidence conclusion for developmental neurotoxicity based on human studies. OHAT specifies that when there is moderate confidence from human studies and there is a relatively large and consistent body of evidence, that would also support a presumed hazard conclusion. Next slide, please. Did the NTP find a relatively large and consistent body of evidence? Next slide. Yes, 52 of 55 studies found reduction in IQ associated with fluoride, as did 18 of 19 studies rated low risk of bias. NTP also said that subgroup analyses by sex, age group, study location, outcome assessment, exposure assessment further support the consistent and robust pattern of fluoride and lowered IQ. Next slide. And you can skip this one to the next slide and skip this one as well. Dose response. Did NTP find a safe threshold? Next slide. Quote, there was no obvious threshold as illustrated by the figure. Next slide. This is a graph from the meta-analysis manuscript showing the meta-dose response relationship between IQ and water fluoride level. Next slide. I've converted the y-axis scale from SMD to IQ points, which will be more familiar to more people. The graph shows no evidence of a threshold at 1.5 or even 0.7 milligrams per liter, and the loss of IQ at those levels is substantial. 0.7 milligrams per liter is the level commonly used in artificial fluoridation. Next slide. This compares the dose-response relationship NTP found for fluoride in IQ to that for childhood lead in IQ found in a well-known pooled study. The dose-response curves and effect sizes are quite similar. Next slide. When an HHS agency commenter tried to argue that the moderate confidence conclusion was based solely on studies with higher fluoride exposures than occur in the United States, the NTP corrected them, saying, the confidence assessment also includes findings from studies with fluoride exposures that are similar to or lower than those associated with optimally fluoridated water supplies. Next slide. Summarizing the NTP findings, moderate confidence of developmental neurotoxicity, large and very consistent body of evidence, no safe threshold observed, moderate confidence conclusion applies to fluoridated water. Next slide.
You have 1 minute left.
No wonder the divisions of HHS that promote fluoridation have tried to alter, delay, and suppress the NTP evaluation. Next slide. We can skip that one. So, my request to the BSc members is to please uphold the scientific integrity of the NTP and its dedicated staff. Read the NTP report. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Does anyone on the BSc have clarifying questions? Oh, okay. I don't see any clarifying questions. So I will thank the commenter, and I want to go to Dr. Wolf because she does have an answer for the question that Dr. Singla raised about gaining access to those FOIA documents.
So yes, those documents are actually posted in the NIH FOIA library under the electronics section, and we will share that information with the board members, and we'll also include that in the minutes to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next commenter is David Kennedy. Is Mr. Kennedy? Yep, I see Mr. Kennedy in the Zoom room. So go ahead, you have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 1 minute left. You are on mute, I believe, Mr. Kennedy. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, go ahead, please. Please start your comments, and we're going to start your clock now. I'll let you know when you have 1 minute left.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm David Kennedy. I'm representing the Preventive Dental Health Association. And that, and next slide, let's move the slides along rapidly. We'd like, again, to echo Chris Neurath's remarks that we appreciate the integrity of the BSC review and your willingness to follow the science. Next slide. Paradigms are hard to change, especially when there's money behind them. Lead was introduced in '29, and it's still in aviation fuels today. Next slide. Baby food, drinking fountains, etc. The old toxicology was if it didn't kill you, it wouldn't hurt you. That was disproven by more recent toxicology. A little bit of data will ruin a perfectly good theory. It should not take 50 years to get a deadly poison out of the water supply, but it does, and the reasons are obvious. Money. Next slide. The risk assessment we conducted, PADHA conducted in 1997 with 3 days of testimony, an army of scientists, and that same year concluded the same as you have. Next slide. The increased risk of fluoride with increased intake. Next slide. This is the Metropolitan Water District who invited Kathleen M. Next slide. Next slide. Infants get a lot of water. Next slide. Can you just keep moving along with me? Yeah, there you go. And so water intake, that's a log scale on the bottom. Next slide. Right there is the EPA's reference dose. Here's the water intake in milligrams per kilogram per day with fluoride. Next slide. From the National Academy of Science Review, these are the points where they've noted there is a departure point from health for neurotoxicity, dental fluorosis, skeletal fluorosis, glucose metabolism, and that you can see all of these are way above the EPA's reference dose, which brings to question whether the EPA succumbed to political pressure to come up with a false reference dose. Next slide. The known effect levels are exceeded by many of the population. Next slide, said Dr. Thiessen to the Metropolitan Water District before they added fluoride to 18 million people's water. In other words, the reference dose does not protect most. Next slide. Fluoride sources are included as you did, and more people will exceed it. The list of adverse effects does not include cancer, and there's probably a cancer-promoting effect, if not a cancer-causing effect. Next slide. Next slide. Director of Laboratories said in 1956, next slide. It's obvious from the knowledge of fluoride toxicity that such factors of safety cannot be established when fluoride is added to the public water supply at the level recommended by the proponent of fluoridation. Next slide. It must be concluded that the fluoridation of public water supplies is a hazardous procedure. People are bound to get hurt. It remains to find out how many and when. That you have begun to identify one of the causes for the disruption in our society today with children with learning disorders, ATD, ADHD, and all manner of neurological impairments. There is no reason to put a neurotoxin in the water supply unless you have a lot of it to get rid of. Who would that be? That would be our military. It's a byproduct, hydrofluorosilicic acid, of making nuclear weapons. That's why we get the big pushback from our military industrial complex, who have captured agencies in our government, the CDC,
you have 1 minute left.
Dental directors, thank you. All dental directors throughout the United States perceive as their duty to promote fluoridation. We could save hundreds of millions of dollars every year by simply firing all of those people who think it's their job to destroy this country with chemicals in the water supply, and instead promote hygiene and oral health with using natural products and good food, free of contaminants, pesticides, and toxins. And I thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for following the science. It's really clear, has been for a long time, and you've identified it for the rest of the public to understand. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'll ask the Board of Scientific Counselors if you have any clarifying questions. And I don't see any hands raised, so thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Our next commenter is William Hirzy. Is Mr. Hirzy in the Zoom room yet? Mr. Hirzy, if you're in the Zoom room, maybe turn on your video. Oh, okay. He's connecting to audio. And I think Mr. Kennedy should, okay, he's no longer in the room, good. We're having some trouble connecting Mr. Hirzy, so we're looking to see if the next, oh, is he ready? Okay. Okay. Mr. Hirzy, are you there? Okay, we're going to move to the next commenter, and we will come back to Mr. Hirzy. So the next person on the list is Paul Connett. And I see his video and connecting to audio, so let's just give a second. Okay, Mr. Connett, I can see you, and it looks like you're connected to audio now, so you will have 5 minutes to share your comments with us, and I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, my name is Paul Connett, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Fluoride Action Network, for which I was the former director. Next slide. I'm a retired professor of chemistry who specializes in...
I can see you, and it looks like you're connected to audio now, so you will have 5 minutes to share your comments with us, and I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. Go ahead.
Can I start again then? Thank you.
So
okay.
You need to disconnect from the
Hello,
live
my name
stream.
is Paul Connett, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Fluoride Action Network, for which I was the former director. Next slide.
Mr. Connett, can you just...
Professor of chemistry and specialized in...
You're connected to audio now. Okay, try again now. We're trying to work on the tech on this end. So go ahead and unmute and let's try again. We think that we have a solution to the echoing. Say something.
Hello.
Okay, so if you want to go back to the beginning, we'll start your clock again.
I'm trying to disconnect the, all right.
We're trying to
my son is helping me.
work on the tech on this end. Go ahead and unmute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh. I'm sorry about that. I'm a retired professor of chemistry who specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. I've spent the last 27 years, since 1996, researching fluoride's toxicity and the water fluoridation debate. My arguments are summarized in the book. Next slide. Next slide. I got involved with the fluoridation debate in 1996, which coincided with the publication of the first 2 Chinese studies published in English, and 1 year after publication of Mullinex' seminal animal study on fluoride and behavior. Shortly after the publication of her study, Mullinex was fired from the Forsyth Dental Center. Thus began my ringside view of the endless scientific punch versus political counterpunch on fluoride's neurotoxicity, which has continued for the last 27 years. The latest political counterpunch, which has been revealed by FOIA documents, has been the attempt by pro-fluoridation entities within the HHS to suppress the NTP review. For scientists like myself, the NTP and its parent body, the NIEHS, occupy a special place in public health. It is not burdened with making policy, so its researchers can focus on the science underlying toxicological issues. It is imperative that this role be rigorously protected by BSc from special interest. In my view, it is extremely dangerous for the health of this nation when a wedge is driven between honest science and public health policy. Such a wedge undermines the public's trust. Now I want to do 3 things. First, point out a serious mistake in the working group's review of the NTP report. Read a short excerpt from a statement by Dr. Linda Birnbaum. And third, give my own plea to the BSc. First, the BSc mistake. Would you go to slide number 18, please? Thank you. On the slide, you'll see a number in the third sentence from the bottom, minus 0.46. Now, the working group says this is equivalent to half an IQ point. In actual fact, it's equivalent to 7 IQ points because the 0.46 is refers to a standard deviation of 15. So 0.46 times 15 is 7 IQ points, not insignificant. Now, this is not the first time this mistake has been made, but it's usually made by pro-fluoridation commentators. Now, please go to slide number 22. This is the statement by Dr. Linda Birnbaum. I'm just taking the first paragraph. As someone who believes deeply in NTP's science-based mission, I am concerned by the recent course of events with the fluoride monograph. The decision to set aside the results of an external peer review process based on concerns expressed by agencies with strong policy interests on fluoride suggests the presence of political interference in what should be strictly a scientific endeavor. Next slide. Now, my message to the BSc, please protect the NTP and the NIEHS from political interference. Please provide one place where honest science can inform public health policy. We know this is not happening in some other regulatory bodies. Please allow the public to have one entity in which they can trust when it comes to the toxicity of chemicals which impact their daily lives. Now, I believe that over the last 6 years, the NTP team, science team, has done an excellent job of reviewing the literature on fluoride's neurotoxicity.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you. To all the commentary and criticism it has received. Thus, I hope the BSc will recommend prompt publication of the NTP's May 18th monograph or the later one and meta-analysis. At most, a few minor word changes may be needed, but nothing, please, to justify more delays or more political interference. Can you go back, please, to slide number 20? I want you to stare at those studies on this page. They were all funded by the NIEHS and some other federal agencies. They were all done in communities with either water fluoridation at 0.6 or 0.7 parts per million, or they were done at equivalent doses. That is the basic. You cannot flush those down the toilet. All the stuff we've heard today does not deny the fact that
Your
all
time
these
is up,
studies, the highest
Mr. Connett.
quality studies, have been done at less than 1.5 parts per million. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I will again ask the board if anyone has clarifying questions for Mr. Connett. Okay, I don't see any questions, so thank you, Mr. Connett. And we're actually going to go backwards to William Hirzy, who we had trouble connecting with earlier. I believe he's on deck, so as soon as we see him here in the Zoom room, we'll turn to him. Oh, okay. It seems like we're going to have to come back to him again because we're not finding him right now. So next person on the list is Rick North. Okay, he is joining. Yep, okay, I see Rick North. So you'll have 5 minutes for your comments, and I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. So go ahead. You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Rick North, representing as a private citizen, not representing a group. My background is in nonprofit health management, 21 years to the American Cancer Society, the last 5 as CEO of the Oregon chapter, and 7 years with Physicians for Social Responsibility before retiring. I'm not a physician, scientist, or dentist, but for more than a decade, I've collaborated with a large group of them all over North America, firmly opposing water fluoridation. I'd like to comment on the NTP report through the lens of a layperson. Fluoridation defenders say it must be proven harmful before stopping it. I believe this is backwards. It's the same argument that was used by the lead and tobacco industries. I believe any chemical added to the public drinking water to affect one's health should first be proven safe. First, do no harm, better safe than sorry. Fluoride at levels in fluoridated water hasn't been proven safe. On the contrary, NTP found substantial evidence it's harmful. In 2006, the National Research Council published its landmark review, Fluoride in Drinking Water, the most comprehensive authoritative review of fluoride's toxicity ever written. It found unequivocally, quote, "It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain and the body," unquote. It examined 5 IQ studies in China, all linking higher fluoride with lower IQ. Even with the study's limitations, the committee concluded, quote, "The consistency of the collective results warrants additional research," unquote. This flatly contradicts the prevailing narrative from the CDC, American Dental Association, and groups that follow them, that fluoridation is proven safe. That conclusion was based on just 5 studies. In 2012, a Harvard meta-analysis found that in 26 out of 27 studies, children ingesting higher fluoride levels tested an average of, as you just heard, 7 IQ points lower. Most had higher concentrations in U.S. water, but many had total exposures comparable to millions of Americans. Today, NTP's meta-analysis linked higher fluoride in 52 out of 55 studies to lower IQs. The consistency is irrefutable. No one can credibly argue that fluoride has been proven safe. But it's not just quantity and consistency, it's quality. The NTP found this link in 18 out of 19 highest quality studies. The BSC working group commented that, quote, "There are few high quality prospective studies, few high quality studies with low fluoride levels, and few studies outside of Asia. There may be fewer studies, but NTP determined, quote, Several of the highest quality studies showing lower IQs in children were done in optimally fluoridated areas, 0.7, unquote. When looking at all the science and all the comments from outside reviewers, NTP concluded, quote, "We have no basis on which to state that our findings are not relevant to some children or pregnant people in the United States." Even the epidemiologist hired by the EPA to defend fluoridation in the current lawsuit acknowledged what she considered the 4 strongest studies ever done. All were funded by NIH, all showed serious cognitive harm, all were from outside Asia, and all were at levels in fluoridated water. The dose makes the poison, so can age and sex. With fluoridation, the toxic dose that pregnant women and children ingest
You have 1 minute left.
depends incredibly on how thirsty they are. The very foundation of fluoridation, administering a drug through drinking water, is absurd. This emperor has no clothes. Everyday fluoridation continues means thousands of babies are born at risk of permanent brain damage, especially low-income families that can't afford bottled water or expensive filters to avoid it. NTP has researched this subject thoroughly for 6 years. They are the experts. The report and meta-analysis, liberated from political interference, should be released by NTP as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'll again ask the board members if you have any clarifying questions. And seeing no raised hands, I'll just say thank you again, and we'll move to our next commenter on the list. I still think we don't have Mr. Hirzy, so we will go to Bill Osmunson, and you'll have 5 minutes,
Yes.
and I'll give you a 1 minute warning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you,
Okay.
and we can see you.
First slide. My name is Bill Osmunson. I'm a dentist, master's in public health. I'm representing Washington Action for Safe Water. And in 2015, I nominated fluoride, which is an authority-administered, depends on who you talk to, drug, or by the FDA. And EPA says it's a contaminant. Now the hot potato has been pushed over to the NTP. I also nominated fluoride for cancer and thyroid reviews. There are about 20 risks and known harms from fluoride. At this rate of 8 years, it's going to take about 160 years for us to go through all the different problems with fluoride, let alone the thousands of other toxins. Thank you for 8 years of your lives on one risk. Next slide. Remember, the voters vote on fluoride, so we need to keep all of the terms or the conclusions in a simple takeaway for the voters, because governments don't like to take responsibility for this. It's too complex for governments. We need to have it simple for the voters. I and other dentists treat dental fluorosis, a known cosmetic and functional harm, about 30 times more costly in damage than the treatment, than the disease prevented. 2 out of 3 children have dental fluorosis. Next slide, please. The EPA scientists have what I would consider to be the most accurate and simple statement. In summary, we hold that fluoridation is an unreasonable risk. That is, the toxicity of fluoride is so great and the purported benefits associated with it are so small, if there are any at all. And I struggled on that one as a dentist who promoted fluoridation because I thought I saw it benefit in my patients. But I was looking at other confounding factors. They're requiring every man, woman, and child in America to ingest at borders on criminal behavior on the part of governments. I agree with that statement, except for borders. Next slide. Thank you very much for the recommendations made by the BSC. I think they're good. I encourage you to follow them. Here are some more recommendations. Number 1, fluoride is highly toxic with a probable toxic dose estimated at 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Fluoride is a known neurotoxin. The question is dosage. What is the known no-effect dosage? What is the benchmark dose? Fluoride is exempt from toxic and poison laws when regulated as a pesticide or drug. Topical fluoride in toothpaste went through the drug approval regulatory process, and the label refers to a 1/4 milligram, which equals a large glass of water, fluoridated water. The drug facts include warning, FDA approved, keep out of reach of children under 6 years of age. If more than used for brushing and is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact the Poison Control Center right away. Directions. Adults and children 2 years and older, do not swallow. What about the words do not swallow is tough, except for my spelling, of course. To minimize swallowing, use a pea-sized amount in children under 6, supervised children. Next slide, please. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration defines a drug in part as substance intended for prevention of disease. Fluoride is well known. That its intent is to prevent disease. Topical fluoride has FDA approval, NDA, CDR approval, with a label, do not swallow, reasonably consistent with the monographs MA that we've been under discussion. Third recommendation, that mothers who are pregnant or want to become pregnant and children under the age of 6, these subpopulations.
You have 1 minute left.
To avoid drinking water with fluoride concentrations over 0.2 milligrams per liter. Do not swallow fluoridated toothpaste and avoid foods and beverages high in fluoride. Caregivers of infants should avoid mixing formula with water containing more than 0.01 milligrams per liter of fluoride. Mother's milk is about 0.004 when it is detected. Next slide, please. The NTP recommended an uncertainty or intraspecific factor of 10. The NTP needs to protect more than just the statistical mean. Some are chemically sensitive, don't excrete fluoride as well, etc. Some drink 10 times as much water as others. And the EPA uses their MCLG at 90% of the population. They're only planning to protect 90% of the population. Those that are drinking the most water,
Your time is up.
They don't include infants. And number 5, the NTP reconciled the disconnect or disagreement between the SOS and which appears to be safe at below 1.5 milligrams per liter.
Mr. Osmunson, I'm going to have to cut you off. Your time is up, and I want to allow time for everybody to comment. So BSC members, I'm going to ask you again, do you have clarifying questions for Mr. Osmunson? And seeing no hands raised, it looks like we do have Mr. Hirzy now. Yes? Okay, so great.
I hope that I'm...
Go ahead.
Am I off mute? Can you hear me?
You're off mute and we can see you, so you will have 5 minutes and I'll give you a 1 minute warning. Go ahead.
Fabulous. Okay, thanks. I'm representing the union that I was president of at the EPA headquarters. I was a senior scientist in the Office of Pesticides and Toxic Substances for 27 years, and I was a leader of the union for 24 of those years. That union, NEFI Local 2050, was the first organization in the federal government to call attention to the public health hazards of fluoride. And we're here now to consider the merits of an analysis by another group of organized scientists in the government, those of the National Toxicology Program. Other commenters are commenting on the science. My focus is on scientific integrity and its relationship with political pressures. Regarding scientific integrity and political pressure, I'm unaware of any other NTP toxicology monograph to be put through 5 rounds of peer review, including one involving so-called interested agencies before final release. Anyway, Local 2050 became aware in the mid-'80s of fluoride's hazards through public comments and an employee complaint about EPA's proposed drinking water regulations. We conducted our own independent analysis and concluded that the EPA proposed health-based standard of 4 milligrams per liter was grossly wrong. And as a matter of fact, in 2006, the National Academy of Sciences Blue Ribbon Committee said the same thing that the union did 12 years before. We tried quietly through in-house talks with management to resolve this problem with the bad science. But the director of the Office of Drinking Water said, "Oh no, we went through the notice and comment process, and the case is closed." We eventually were contacted by NRDC to join their lawsuit by filing an amicus brief. And the lawsuit was over those grossly inadequate drinking water standards. And we also did other things like help citizens who found out that we had challenged EPA's abandonment of regulating asbestos back in 1984. Management was not happy about that. We were bargaining with management over scientific integrity for several years up until 1998, when the EPA installed carpeting, which was making employees sick, and that got out into the media and turned out to be a big brouhaha. So that was the end of bargaining over scientific integrity. We were able later, 10 years later, under the National Partnership Council operation under Clinton administration, to get EPA to adopt what's called the Principles of Scientific Integrity. We think that was the first such thing in any federal agency. It turned out, however, that the PSI was a toothless policy statement by EPA, which ignores it whenever it's convenient to do so. And in the matter of the fluoride toxicity, it still maintains that 4 milligrams per liter is an adequate public health protective standard. Incredible. EPA's successful defanging of the issue of scientific integrity by simply ignoring it has not been lost on the federal science establishment. The current model program of scientific integrity, recently published by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, codifies that toothlessness. In the NTP's 5-round peer review of the fluoride monograph, including interested agencies, is today's example of defanging the defanging science.
You have 1 minute left.
Integrity. Whatever happened to the two? Well, okay. My take on the review process is that if the political establishment disagrees with peer-reviewed scientific decision made by qualified scientists, just keep on reviewing until the politicians are satisfied. In his investigation of the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle, because Reagan pressured launch in sub-freezing temperatures, Richard Feynman said it best: "You can't fool Mother Nature." To continue to promote universal ingestion of fluoride would constitute public health and economic governmental malfeasance of the first order. Since 2015, I, along with other scientists, visited EPA offices twice to report on research showing
your time is up, Mr. Hirzy.
Developmental neurotoxicity.
Thank you for your comments.
Nothing happened until a lawsuit was filed in NTP.
Ask the Board of Scientific Counselors if there are any questions. And seeing none, I will thank you for your comments and move to the next commenter. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Dr. Singla. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to the commenter for the comments. Not a question. I just wanted to offer a clarification to the comments that NRDC is not party to any lawsuits related to fluoride. We have submitted amicus briefs in relation to the case mentioned. However, the briefs were in support of neither party and were focused on the requirements of the law under the Toxic Substances Control Act.
Thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other comments, we'll move to the next commenter, Jack Kall. And I see Mr. Kall in the Zoom room.
Yes.
Yep, so you can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You have 5 minutes, and then I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, I am Dr. Jack Kall, a practicing dentist for 46 years. I am the executive chair of the board of directors of the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, or IAOMT. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 1984. Our 1,500 members are dentists, physicians, and researchers who investigate and communicate safe, science-based treatments to promote whole body health. Our motto is, "Show me the science." Much of our Academy's focus has been on the toxicology of materials used in dentistry. We are the largest organization devoted to this. We have especially focused on 3 commonly used toxic materials in dentistry. Number 1, mercury, a neurotoxin used in amalgam fillings. Number 2, bisphenol A, an endocrine disruptor used in sealants and composite fillings. And number 3, fluoride, used in rinses, toothpaste, varnishes, cements, and filling materials. They are all put directly into the mouth. Additionally, fluoride is used in modalities of direct ingestion in the form of fluoridated drinking water, fluoridated salt, and fluoride supplements. Next slide, please. For over 30 years, our organization has been sponsoring and funding research on fluoride's toxicity. We have been especially interested and very concerned about recently published studies regarding the neurotoxicity of fluoride, and therefore support the NTP systematic review. We are very disappointed that fluoride-promoting dental interests, both within the federal government and outside it, have been trying to influence the NTP's findings, not based on science, but in an effort to defend their misguided policy of promoting water fluoridation. Next slide, please. What are the NTP's key findings? Number 1, that human epidemiological evidence supports a conclusion of moderate confidence that fluoride is a developmental neurotoxin. Number 2, that no safe exposure threshold was found for fluoride's effect on IQ. And number 3, that fluoride exposures experienced by pregnant women and children in the U.S. today are within the range where human studies have found reduced IQ. The report provides extensive detail on the over 150 human studies identified as relevant. The report used rigorous, pre-established methods to rate the quality of individual studies. The IAOMT agrees with the NTP conclusions. We believe the monograph should have been published on its intended public release date of May 18, 2022. The revisions NTP made subsequent to it being blocked by fluoridation promoting divisions within HHS and the revisions suggested by the BSC working group will not alter the key findings. Any additional delays in declaring the report final are unjustified. The IAOMT hopes the BSC will support the incredible effort that the NTP scientific experts have put into this systematic review. We agree with the external peer reviewers who offered the following comments. What you have done is state of the art, and the analysis itself is excellent, and you thoroughly address comments. And well done. And lastly, findings were interpreted objectively. Next slide, please. From both careful review of the evidence on the association between fluoride and tooth decay, those without the countries without having fluoridated their water supply,
you have
as well
1 minute
as those,
left.
Okay, as well as those again countries either that have fluoridated their water supply or not over the last 50 years, you can see the dramatic declines in both groups of countries. And this information is provided from the World Health Organization. Next slide, please. The precautionary principle reminds us that in the face of uncertain evidence, it is important to act in a manner that protects public health. Next slide, please. I close with the IAOMT's position on fluoride. Quote, in summary, Given the elevated number of fluoride sources and the increased rates of fluoride intake in the American population, which have risen substantially since water fluoridation began in the 1940s, it has become a necessity to reduce and work toward eliminating avoidable sources of fluoride exposure, including water fluoridation, fluoride-containing dental materials, and other fluoridated products.
Your time is up. Thank you very much for your comments, and I'm going to ask BSC members if you have any clarifying questions. Seeing none, we have Mr. Pollock, our final commenter. Howard Pollock. I see Mr. Pollock in the Zoom room. You want to come onto video and off mute so you can share your comments? Mr. Pollock? Oh, great. Okay. We see you, so you have 5 minutes to comment, and I'll give you a 1 minute.
Good afternoon. Good morning here in California. Dr. Graham, members of the board, I'm Howard Pollock, clinical professor in the Department of Preventive and Restorative Dental Sciences at the School of Dentistry, University of California, San Francisco. I'm a dentist, board certified in dental public health, and an advisor to the California Department of Public Health. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of the American Dental Association. Community water fluoridation is the controlled adjustment of the natural fluoride content in water to levels recommended by the U.S. Public Health Service to help prevent tooth decay. For more than 75 years, it has been a safe and inexpensive way to reduce tooth decay in children and adults by at least 25%. The CDC hailed it as one of 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. The ADA was initially pleased that NTP was examining the literature, as were others, to determine whether there was an association between fluoride exposure and IQ. Unfortunately, we're now in the position of having to ask if you really want to stake NTP's reputation on a report whose research methods, conclusions, clarity, and transparency have been so unorthodox. First, the public deserves to know that its research agencies are not arbitrarily changing peer reviewers when the results are not to their liking. NTP started by asking the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM, to serve as the report's peer reviewer. NASEM is the acknowledged gold standard for reviewing complex scientific issues. After the NASEM committee reported the first 2 drafts would not survive scientific scrutiny without major revision, NTP abandoned that course of peer review and instead handpicked its own panel to review the draft before you. That is not consistent with the spirit of a truly independent peer review. NTP also has not resolved what NASEM identified as worrisome inconsistencies in its risk of bias determinations. NASEM questioned several instances where NTP appeared to favor studies supporting its hypothesis and dismiss others refuting it. In response, NTP removed its meta-analysis from the current draft. Meta-analysis findings are used to reveal the biases, strengths, and weaknesses of existing studies. Both of these actions are red flags for transparency and scientific integrity. Second, we question why NTP has been so averse to adding a disclaimer, as NASEM recommended, clarifying that its literature review did not validate the hypothesis that consistent exposure to low levels of fluoride impact IQ. A lay reader would have difficulty ascertaining that the report's findings are limited to fluoride exposures that are more than double what the U.S. Public Health Service recommends for community water fluoridation. A disclaimer would help prevent the findings from being mischaracterized in debates about fluoridating local water systems. Finally, even if NTP published its report today, it would already be out of date. NTP's finding is based on 19 studies, and at least 9 more have been published since the study period ended in 2020, including 2 meta-analyses. One found, I quote, "The limitations of most studies raise uncertainties about both the causal nature of such relation and the exact thresholds of exposure involved. Such key issues can only be confirmed by additional high-quality longitudinal studies. Another published last week found uncritical acceptance of fluoride IQ studies has hindered methodological progress. In other words, the current state of the science does not validate the hypothesis that fluoride exposure is consistently associated with lower IQ in children. We therefore strongly support the BSc Working Group's recommendations regarding NTP's meta-analysis manuscript. At a time when the public's trust in federal research is declining, we urge you to consider whether this report is consistent with the White House Task Force on Scientific Integrity's recommendations for federal agencies to improve their research processes and adopt better methods of communicating scientific findings to lay audiences. Since there's no compelling scientific or public health reason for rushing this report to publication, we urge NTP not to publish this report until our concerns identified both here and in our written comments are resolved. I thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your comments. Board members, please raise your hand if you have clarifying questions. I do have a question for you, Mr. Pollack. Would you restate the disclaimer? You suggested there was a disclaimer you would like to see.
Well, the disclaimer that the findings do not support consistent evidence of effect of low fluoride concentrations in water below 1.5 milligrams per liter with IQ.
Great, thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so thank you for your comments. And Mr. Pollack is the last person who had signed up to provide oral comments, so our oral comment period has ended. We are scheduled to take a break, 10 minutes? 15 minutes. Okay, we're scheduled to take a 15-minute break, and then we will come back for deliberation of the Board of Scientific Counselors and conversation with members of the working group about the report.
I just asked for the BSc members to join 2 minutes earlier so we can do a roll call. Make sure everybody's in the room before we reconvene. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll see you after the break. Okay, hello everyone. We're back from the break. We took a little bit longer than expected, but we're happy to be back here now for the portion of the meeting where the Board of Scientific Counselors will discuss what we've heard and potentially have a dialogue with members of the working group. So I'd like to start this part of the meeting by returning to the charge. So you've heard this a couple times, but it's important because it frames our discussion for now. So the Board of Scientific Counselors today has the same charge as the working group had, and that is to evaluate the adequacy of the NTP responses to external peer review and/or federal agency comments received during development of both the State of the Science monograph and the meta-analysis manuscript. So we will keep that charge in mind, and if we need to return to it as we discuss, we can do so. So I want to start by asking board members to just go ahead and raise your hands if you have questions that you would like to tee off the discussion with. I have one, but I first want to open that opportunity to you all. And if you do, please use the raise your hand function and come onto video. Okay, right now I'm not seeing hands raised. So I'm just gonna turn to Dr. Eaton and the working group with a question about the meta-analysis issue that I brought up really because knowing that we might have lay publics who are listening in who might not really understand the difference between the State of the Science monograph and the meta-analysis. But I feel like we've also heard some examples in your presentation that could lead to a little bit more robust conversation about meta-analyses and the models that were reviewed as part of the Board of Scientific Counselors Working Group efforts. So you could speak to that, or you could invite a working group member to speak to that.
Yes, well, as I said previously, I have limited knowledge on how meta-analyses work other than they are complex and the analyses can be statistically challenging. I would re-emphasize that the biggest challenge that I think that the NTP authors faced and that we faced and that everybody faces is how do you take these data and construct a meaningful dose response curve and infer the shape of that dose response curve. And that is the huge amount of uncertainty here. The authors assumed a linear response, and there was a question raised about whether that assumption was justified or not. You saw in one of the presenters, they showed what the authors had used as the shape of the response. What I would like to do is ask any of my committee members who are with us today that have looked at this and have raised the issues about how the authors might have done or might be able to do a better job of discussing the strengths and limitations of the dose response analysis from a from a scientific statistical perspective, so to speak, to talk to some of the issues that we identified and that reviewers had identified that we were talking about. And again, we weren't peer reviewing, we were responding to other reviewers who had expertise in this area. I don't mean to put people, you see a hand?
Dr. Morton has come on to video,
yeah.
so
Thank you.
Are you willing to chime in here, Dr. Morton?
Sure.
And
absolutely.
If you wouldn't mind reintroducing yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Sally Morton. I'm Executive Vice President of Knowledge Enterprise at Arizona State University. I'm also a professor of statistics, and I have expertise and experience in meta-analysis. So I think Dr. Eaton really hit the nail on the head. I mean, the challenge here is one of heterogeneity in the studies, which is always a challenge for meta-analysis. In our review, we asked for more detail on that point, as well as publication bias, and suggested that the authors do a better job of articulating what the impact of heterogeneity and publication bias might be on the results. Going to the dose response model, our comment was that it was difficult to understand what model was actually applied given the information that was in the paper. So I, for example, could not reconstruct the analysis in my head. I couldn't figure out whether it was at study level or how they were exactly doing the meta-analysis. There is in any model like that an assumption, such as linearity. The challenge that meta-analysts have is you have the data that you have and the studies that you have. And so it's difficult to often test things like, could it be a quadratic curve, or is it linear? And so you're often stuck with doing the best you can with the data that you have available.
That's helpful, and I think that speaks to the question as I raised it earlier, which is why there were more areas where the BSC working group offered comments or suggestions for revisions. I see Dr. Engel is on video now too. Do you have comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just add that, do you want me to reintroduce myself? Stephanie Engel, UNC, an epidemiologist. I would just add that I think part of this came up because there was an observation that we had perhaps more disagreement with some of their responses to the meta-analysis, but I would be careful to not assume that that is because we thought the meta-analysis was a substantively worse document. It's not, that's not it. We were only reviewing the reviewer's comments. So it's just partly the nature of the comments that came in for that document were just, more specific, perhaps like there were just more issues where we felt clarity could improve the understanding of it. It's not that, our charge was really just to respond to their response, not to evaluate the manuscript. So I just that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and it reminds me of another point that was made in the earlier presentation, which is in some cases where responses were deemed inadequate, it was actually because there was content from the authors that should be brought into the document. Could you speak to that, Dr. Eaton?
Yeah, and I would remind everyone that our fundamental task here was to try to help the authors make the documents that we expect will be published scientifically strong as possible. And so where we saw areas that were either confusing or required additional explanation, that's what we asked for. And again, I would emphasize both what Sally and Stephanie said. You know, the meta-analysis are almost an order of magnitude more complex than how you interpret, and there's going to be lots of uncertainties and issues to deal with those compared to the state of the science. Part of the problem was the state of the science relied upon the meta-analysis for many of its conclusions, and so the meta-analysis is really important to get it right. And frankly, it's really, really hard to get something right. There's not a paper, there's nobody out there that could have done this thing, and there wouldn't be people coming back having questions about it. So I want this to be interpreted that we were overly critical of what they did with the meta-analysis. It's a huge task. It's a huge challenge. And what we tried to do was provide guidance and suggestions as to how they can make that report stronger and more scientifically defensible.
I have a follow-on question, but I want to remind the members of the Board of Scientific Counselors that we will have a motion today and decide whether we accept the working group's recommendations, whether we offer additional suggestions or revisions, whether we reject their report, or whether we have some other course of action. So I am looking to you to come on video and share any feedback you have. And I see Dr. Bloom has his hand up. Share, and also questions. We have many of the working group members with us. They've done a huge amount of work, and we got an overview presentation. I know all of us have looked at the materials, but this is an opportunity for dialogue. So I really encourage you to join in. And Dr. Bloom, go ahead.
Yeah, so first, I think I need to congratulate the working group. I mean, I think this is just tremendous job. You know, one thing that I was intrigued was there is an obvious recommendation about the need to update probably the literature, given that in the last 2 or 3 years, additional very important studies have been published. But, you know, and I completely agree with that. That would be probably a comment I would do in a peer review of a publication. But when we have that in mind, what is the implication in terms of the meta-analysis?
Well, you know, this is a real challenge to figure out how to do this. I would say that the working group stopped short of saying that the authors need to redo the meta-analysis, because that's a lot of work. However, there are some recent studies that are meta-analyses of these same data. And so we felt that at the least, if they didn't redo it, they need to be able to discuss in the discussion what they found with their meta-analysis relative to what new studies are, without necessarily repeating it, because and this, you know, this was something that we talked about, and it is a challenge on having to go back and repeat the meta-analysis. But I would say personally, I don't see that as necessary. I do think that it's important that they discuss their findings in the context of newer data, even if those data were not included in their meta-analysis. I don't know, Eric, if that answers your question or not, but that was a major issue that we spent a lot of time talking about, on how do we guide them in a way that in which something can be done in a timely manner and not having to start from scratch.
I think I would agree. I would actually advise it the same way, because we got to balance here the practicality of doing it in a robust manner. And like you said, a lot of these new references are actually additional meta-analysis, which may actually be extremely useful during the discussion part of the manuscript.
Exactly, and that's what I see is they can talk about the strengths and the limitations of what they did and what others have done since then and how they agree or don't agree, and have an open discussion about, what that does is illustrate the challenges of doing these. But I think that is, in my own opinion, that would be the approach rather than saying that you need to go back and start it, redo the meta-analysis. I don't think any of us felt like that was probably the right answer given the importance of time in this whole issue.
Thank you. And I see that Dr. Payne Sturgis has her hand up and is on video, so go ahead.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Devin Payne Sturgis from the University of Maryland. I just want to echo the last comment. It's exactly the question I was going to ask the working group. So I appreciate that, Dr. Blue.
Great. Okay, so I am hearing both there were questions and some agreement from board members that though there is contextualization that may need to happen, that can be done without going back to the drawing board. And in the interest of time and recognizing some of the working group's comments as well as the public commenters, there is an interest in timeliness in addressing this. All right, other BSC members, do you have questions for the working group? Yes, Dr. Singla.
Thank you, Veena Singla with the Natural Resources Defense Council. My question was in relation to a comment made by a public commenter about the interpretation of a number as half an IQ point versus a standard deviation of 7 IQ points. So I'd suggest taking a look to see if that needs a correction.
Absolutely. We've already begun that discussion, and I'm hoping that Dr. Morton will go back and look at that. And it's entirely possible that I took, in my preparing statements, took something out of context that was not statistically correct. But I agree with you, Veena, that we will definitely look into that and see if there was an error in our report. Yeah, Sally?
I'll just say I'm happy to do that if that's helpful. I can't answer it now because I haven't looked at the data, but I will do so.
Thank you.
And I'll just flag that other public commenters who called out specific pages and citations were generally supporting these references that they shared. I see that Dr. Meeker has his hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge and weigh in. Very appreciative of the level of detail the working group went into with the comments, and agree that moving on this as quickly as possible is probably in their best interest. And it's clear that they're really narrowing in on getting the language just right. And I think that suggests it's time to put it out there. Of course, everything's kind of a working document with the information you have at the time, and I think it's got to move forward. And I appreciate all the work. Thank you.
So as we wait to see if any other BSC members have comments, I'm just going to circle back to the 4 key areas, the broad issues that Dr. Eaton identified as emerging from the working group's work, just to prompt thinking. If anyone, if I jog your memory about questions you have or any key points that you would like to make, Dr. Eaton, please do so. So the first broad issue was related to scientific issues. And there was quite a bit of discussion around dose-response relationships, timing, cumulative exposure, the dose-response curve, the issue of heterogeneity, So there was a lot there that was well addressed by the working group, but I don't know if BSC members have questions around any of those issues, or if you have any comments you would like to make, Dr. Eaton.
Well, I don't. I think that the only comment I would make was that the issues we raised more often than not were raised by more than a single reviewer. There were multiple reviewers, and that is part of why we felt that you know, in total, these were important issues that needed to be addressed before the report was released. I hope that we provided the authors with the directions and the concerns, and in some instances, ways perhaps around that or ways to address it. You know, I would also simply state that we fully recognize that there's no way that you will ever have a perfect document. You know, that there will always be uncertainty, and there will always be debate and discussion around points, and we hope that we provided them ways in which they can more fully describe the uncertainties. And I would say that was a lot of it, was not so much that there was something wrong, but more it was either unclear what was done, or the science behind their conclusions needed more explanation.
So then the second bucket of issues was sufficiency of information, and here a number of issues were raised, but in particular the publication of the documents as standalone or not. And since we are hearing about the importance of timing, could you speak to that?
Well, again, we are not really in a position to tell them what to do, okay? But it became evident that if you have the State of the Science report, which would be a document published through the NTP and IAHS, and another document that was going out to a journal for peer review and additional things, that one relying on the other was problematic unless somehow the timing was coordinated. We noted one potential way around that would be for the NTP to publish both documents rather than submitting one for additional outside peer review. But that's not our choice. They need to decide how they want to move forward. But we do think there are ways to move forward in which each document stands alone, but that would require, you know, some additional modifications of both documents. And some redundancy, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you. The next bucket was precision of text, and I don't necessarily have a question about that, because as many of us are part of processes where our written work is reviewed, there are always ways to improve your communication and be more precise. And I appreciate that the working group went to great lengths to make suggestions and explain those suggestions. Then the final bucket was research needs. And do you have any comments about that bucket?
No, as the authors of the report said at one point in response to it, it's always easy to say we need more research. And I completely understand that perspective. And we heard the perspective of lots of people making comments that we don't need more research. What we need to do, though, and I think what this document can do and will do, is to take what we know now and put it in the context of what's important in assessing the potential risks. The last thing I would say is simply to remind everyone that this document, as the author stated, was never intended to be a risk-benefit analysis of fluoride in drinking water. It was intended to assess the scientific evidence for an association between neurodevelopmental effects and fluoride in water, and I think they've gone a long ways towards that, and I think hopefully they can make some changes and finalize that.
Great, I appreciate that follow-up. And I wonder if anyone on the board has any questions or comments. Yes, Dr. Martin.
Yeah, this isn't explicitly commented on. It was highlighted, the conclusion in the meta-analysis, and I guess the response seemed appropriate, but it goes to maybe that relationship between the meta-analysis and the larger, or this, you know, the systematic review or the summary. So it says extends prior meta-analysis in the report associations. And actually, let me go to the actual document just to make sure I'm getting it right. the findings of our larger, extends the findings of our larger systematic review. So I'm just going, I guess it goes just a clarification on whether they.
Will you state the page you're on just so that for the record?
Oh, apologies. This is page 15 of the July 2022 draft meta-analysis manuscript. So just to be clear, yeah, so maybe that was and it looks like there may be slight wording differences between some of what was in the comment pages and this. So just to be clear, I guess it's just my question is more the relationship of the meta-analysis kind of extending something or feeding the conclusions of it, because it was stated maybe a little bit differently across different comments in both presentations and maybe even in the documents.
I might punt this to somebody that was looking at the meta-analysis. I think, if I recall, that they were talking about, there were, prior to this pre-publication meta-analysis, there were previously published meta-analyses, not by these authors, okay? And I think that they were addressing that their meta-analysis was consistent with ones that had been published previously, not by them. And our comments, our discussion on that's great. But we would point out that since the time that they did that, there are some additional meta-analyses that have been published with these same data, and so they would probably need to extend their discussion to include those under the same way that they had talked about previous ones. Not necessarily redo it, but include those in their discussion. But I think that statement was referring to other meta-analysis of these data that have been published by other people.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, I just want to make sure is there any other comment or question for the working group? I have a question. It's a process question, so feel free to tell me that we will take it up later. But I wonder when the time comes for authors to respond to recommendations, are members of the working group available to the authors? What is the process?
Do you mean with regard to clarity, with regard to what they were? I'm sure we would like every opportunity to ensure that something's clear and can work either through the chair or the chair reaching out to the appropriate staff, appropriate work group member, yes.
Great, okay, that's what I wanted to make sure that there was a process and that Dr. Eaton was okay with the process that seemed to be the logical process. So,
Kathleen, this is Rick. If I could just. Oops,
yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, this is Rick. Sorry, do you mind if I just chime in and ask, just make a comment here?
We would love to hear your comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the comment that Mary just made. It would be enormously beneficial for me if the working group were willing to continue to work with us and work with me to evaluate comments that are addressed, and how the authors from the NTP will be addressing some of the comments. So thank you for your willingness to do that. And again, that would be just enormously helpful to me.
Okay, let me just clarify that I was not signing the working group members up for continued service. I know they are all very nervous with the direction of this conversation, but thank you for letting Dr. Eaton know that you appreciate his willingness to be a resource for clarifying.
I would just say that undoubtedly there will be things in our report that our report isn't clear, okay? And I will do my best to try to either clarify myself or go to my members if there is some point of clarification that is needed in this, because undoubtedly with the length of this document and the complexity of the issues, there will be things that we've stated that are not clear, and I'll do my best to try to help clarify those.
Dave, if I could again just chime in on this. I mean, this is a very complicated issue, and And I feel that I need the assistance of the advisory group, the BSC, and the working group of the BSC, working together with the BSC to really bring things forward. And I just don't feel that I would be in the best position to make decisions about clarifying some of these items because they are complex. I mean, for example, the issue of risk of bias. It's a very complicated issue, and I know in that, Dave, in that article that you referenced that was published just a couple of months ago in Environmental Research, a big topic of that article was the risk of bias, the moderate to at least moderate risk of bias in many of the publications that were used for the state of the science. So, just help with that as we go forward would be enormously helpful for me.
We will do our best that we can. I cannot commit the committee members to turning into peer reviewers on issues like that, however, but we will certainly try to make as clear as we can what the concerns we raised were.
Yeah. Well, and again, just clarifying, I hope that the BSC will be willing to continue to work with me. And I bring this up now in a public session only because my understanding is that I'm not allowed to actually discuss this privately with any of you. So I'm bringing it up now in a public session. But just expressing my interest in continuing to work with the BSC and the extent to which the working group is willing to continue to add their enormously valuable contributions, that would be really helpful.
Dr. Wolf, did you have a comment? Oh, okay. Great. I will just close this part of the discussion by saying I do think the global issues that arose are issues that arise with many different compounds, contaminants, chemicals. So yes, there is dialogue that is ongoing about a number of the key issues that were highlighted in the report, and we appreciate the working group's efforts to provide specific recommendations on topics that are really thorny. Oh, you do have a comment, Dr. Wolf? Okay, we thought we were having a technical issue, but we're not. But I do, not seeing any other hands raised, comments, people coming on video, it feels like it is an appropriate time to ask the Board of Scientific Counselors if anyone has a motion, and recalling that our options could include accepting the working group's report as written, accepting the report with specific revisions, rejecting the report, or some other recommendation that you might offer. So does any board member want to offer a motion? Dr. Singla, I see you on camera.
Yes, thank you. Veena Singla with Natural Resources Defense Council. I move to accept the report with the potential correction that was discussed earlier. Thank you.
And let's get the verbiage clear on that potential addition. You had phrased it, Dr. Eaton, as discussing the findings in the documents in the context of newer data in a discussion section. Is that correct?
That would be a second one, okay, which I think is appropriate. She's referring to the specific question that was raised by one of the commenters about the statistical analysis, and that needs correction as well.
Okay, well, so then we just have, I don't mean to put a motion on the table, we just have Dr. Singla's motion with that one correction. Is there any?
I second.
Who was that, Dr. Bloom or Ruth?
Yeah.
Bloom, okay. Is there any discussion? So the motion is to accept the BSC working group report as written with the statistical correction to the reference statistical analysis as identified in the oral public comments. Any discussion? I would like to ask about this. I do think there was an additional element which we just referenced, which was the providing a little bit greater contextualization, and that was offered as a way to be able to move forward this in a timely fashion. So I will ask board members if anyone agrees to that friendly amendment.
Yes, I would like to add that that to the motion, to add the new meta-analysis in the discussion.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kimbrough. Do I have a second?
Yes, a second, but I thought that was actually part of 2 because I think that was included in the
Great. Okay.
in the BCS working group report, no?
Yes. Yes. Great. Thank you. Okay. Then we can just focus on the initial motion. Any other discussion? Any other issues that need to be put on the table before we vote? Okay, so then what is our process for voting, Dr. Brownlow?
I believe Dr. Kimbrough made the motion?
No.
Or
Dr. Singla. And Dr. Bloom seconded.
So if you can please call each one of the members and I can register their vote.
Okay, so I'm going to call each of you and you can just share your vote, whether you vote yes, no, or abstain. And Dr. Brownlow has already indicated Dr. Singla and Dr. Bloom's vote based on their motions. So Dr. Kimbrough.
Yes.
Dr. Martin.
Yes.
Dr. Meeker.
Yes.
Dr. Payne Sturgis.
Yes.
Dr. Rusi.
Yes.
And Dr. Yang.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a unanimous support for this motion. And in my role as chairing this meeting, I will formally communicate to the NTP director the recommendations that we have made today. We will turn to Dr. Trevor Archer to close the meeting by talking about what the next steps are in this process.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin by thanking the members of the working group, as well as the BSC members for the efforts they've put in to this review, and also the members of the public for joining and expressing the comments that we heard. As indicated, once the chair of the BSC transmits the final report to Dr. Wojcik as director of the NTP, we will sort of carefully consider the recommendations that have been made, and then a decision will be arrived at by the NTP leadership to address the report as presented. So again, I really want to thank the working group members and Dr. Eaton in particular for chairing and organizing this, recognizing the contributions of Dr. Wolf and the support team from ICF that have provided and allowing us to bring together, I think, a really comprehensive review in a very clear and timely manner so that we could arrive at hopefully an adjudicated version of these documents that will allow us to fulfill the mission of the NIEHS and the NTP. So with that, I'll thank you and turn it back to Dr. Gray.
And I see Dr. Wojcik is on camera. Did you want to make any comments?
Only to thank you, Kathleen, and thank all members of the BSC and members of the working group. Well done.
Thank you. We appreciate you being able to join us even from far away. Okay, and I will echo thanks to Dr. Eaton and the working group. We know you put in a ton of time and we appreciate your expertise and your effort. Thank you to NIEHS staff and ICF staff. Are there any announcements that anything we need to cover, Dr. Brownlow?
So last housekeeping items. So I would also like to thank everybody for your preparation and participation in the meeting today, and everybody who's helped put the meeting together. And also, as a reminder, slides and video from today will be made available on the meeting webpage as soon as they meet the government requirements for accessibility. And meeting minutes will be posted to the webpage once they have been reviewed for accuracy by board members and approved by the chair. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Yes? Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Just one point of clarification. The sheet that you showed with the motion, needed to also say that was with the with the working group re-examining the question about the IQ comment response. So that needs to be part of the formal record, which was part of the motion. I just want to be sure it was captured in what the public saw. Sorry to.
Thank you. And as we said at that time, we will convey that in writing to Dr. Wojcik. So although we apologize that it was not properly displayed in real time, that will be conveyed in writing to Dr. Wojcik. If you have it, that's fine. If you would like to display it, that'd be fantastic. Yes, and just for everyone listening's benefit, and we will take the language exactly as it appears in the report, so there's no ambiguity about what that is referring to. So there will be a written motion to Dr. Wojcik. So with that those final comments, we are adjourning. We thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.